There are defeats that break people. And then there are defeats that reveal them. When Japan walked off the field after the WBC loss, the world was watching Shohei Ohtani. Not just because he is the greatest player on the planet. Not just because he had carried enormous expectations on his shoulders throughout the tournament. But because everyone wanted to know the same thing. How would he respond? Would the composure crack? Would the public face finally slip? Would the man who has been described by those closest to him as almost unnaturally focused, show, just once, that the weight of a crushing defeat had reached somewhere deep enough to leave a mark? What happened next shocked everyone. Not because Ohtani fell apart. But because of what he did instead. Because of what he said behind closed doors, words that his battery partner Blake Rushing later revealed to the American media in a statement that immediately went viral. Words that nobody expected. Words that, once you hear them, make it impossible to look at Shohei Ohtani the same way again. Today, we are going inside that story. The performance. The locker room. The remark. And what all of it tells us about the man who may be the most mentally extraordinary athlete walking the planet right now. To understand the full impact of what Ohtani did after the WBC defeat, you need to understand exactly what that defeat meant. The World Baseball Classic is not a casual tournament for Japan. It is not an exhibition. It is not a warm-up event that professionals show up to reluctantly between their real obligations. For the Japanese national team, for Samurai Japan, the WBC carries the weight of national identity. Of pride that stretches back decades. Of a country that treats baseball not simply as a sport but as something closer to a cultural language. And Ohtani had been at the center of all of it. From the moment the roster was announced, the expectations surrounding him were unlike anything placed on any single player in recent tournament history. Two-way contributions. Leadership. The visible embodiment of everything Japanese baseball had built itself into at the highest level. He had delivered. Emphatically. Completely. In a way that reminded the global audience, if any reminder was still needed, that what he does on a baseball field exists in a category that current vocabulary barely covers. And then came the loss. Sudden. Painful. The kind of ending that arrives before you are mentally ready for it, that leaves a team standing on a field trying to process a reality that has not yet fully registered. The cameras found Ohtani immediately. Because they always find Ohtani. And what they captured in those first raw seconds after the final out was a man absorbing something that clearly hurt. Not performing hurt. Not manufacturing emotion for a watching audience. Simply, hurting. The way anyone hurts when something they cared about deeply does not go the way they gave everything to make it go. That image traveled around the world within minutes. And then, quietly, Ohtani disappeared into the locker room. What happened next is what this story is really about. Before we get to the remark itself, you need to understand who Blake Rushing is and why his words carry the weight they do. In the complex ecosystem that surrounds an elite baseball player, the battery partner occupies a unique position. A catcher and a pitcher share something that goes beyond the professional. They share a decision-making language that is developed in real time, under pressure, in front of thousands of people. Every pitch is a conversation. Every sign is a negotiation. Every at-bat is a collaboration built on trust that has been earned through hours of preparation and thousands of repetitions. To be Shohei Ohtani's battery partner is to be granted access to the version of him that exists inside competition. Not the public figure. Not the press conference participant. The actual competitor, the mind that is calculating, adapting, reading, and responding in real time at the highest level the sport offers. Rushing has described this experience in terms that make clear it is unlike anything else in his professional life. Working with Ohtani behind the plate is, by his account, an education delivered at full speed. A masterclass in preparation, in pitch sequencing, in the kind of in-game intelligence that separates great pitchers from truly historic ones. But what makes Rushing's revelation to the American media so significant is not simply that he is Ohtani's battery partner. It is that he is someone who was present in the spaces where Ohtani was not performing for anyone. Where the cameras were gone and the crowd noise had faded and there was nothing left but the actual human reality of what the team had just experienced together. He was there for what came after. And what he heard, what Ohtani said in those private moments, is what stopped the American sports media completely in its tracks. Professional locker rooms after significant defeats are complicated environments. There is grief in them. Real grief, the kind that sits in a person's chest and does not respond to logic or perspective or any of the reasonable things that people on the outside say to make defeat feel smaller than it is. There is silence in them, often. The particular silence of people who shared something and lost it and are not yet ready to talk about what that means. There is also, sometimes, anger. Frustration. The replaying of moments that could have gone differently, the pitch that caught too much of the plate, the swing that arrived a fraction late, the defensive decision that seemed right in the moment and looks catastrophic in retrospect. These are normal human responses to competitive loss at the highest level. They are universal. Every locker room in every sport after every significant defeat contains some version of this emotional landscape. What Rushing described about Ohtani in that locker room was none of this. Or rather, it was something that contained all of this, acknowledged all of this, sat with all of this, and then moved somewhere completely unexpected. According to Rushing's account to the American media, Ohtani was quiet in the immediate aftermath. Not shut down. Not distant. Simply quiet in the way of someone who is processing something fully rather than escaping it. Present with the loss rather than running from it. And then he spoke. What Ohtani said, the remark that Rushing later revealed and that immediately began spreading across American sports media, was not what anyone expected from a man who had just experienced one of the most painful defeats of his professional career. It was not a vow of revenge. It was not an expression of bitterness. It was not the carefully managed public statement of an athlete remembering that his words would eventually be repeated. It was something far more disarming than any of those things. Ohtani looked around at his teammates. At the people who had fought alongside him through the entire tournament. And according to Rushing, he said, simply, quietly, with complete sincerity, that this loss belonged to him. That whatever had not gone right was his responsibility to carry. That his teammates had given everything and that what he felt most, sitting in that locker room, was not frustration with the result but gratitude for the people who had stood beside him. Rushing told the American media that the room went completely still when Ohtani said it. Because these were not the words of an athlete managing his public image. These were not the calculated remarks of a global superstar aware that what he says will eventually reach an audience of millions. This was a man, in a private room, speaking to the people he had shared a field with, and choosing, at the moment of greatest personal disappointment, to make it about them rather than himself. One reporter who picked up the story described it as the most unexpectedly human thing they had heard from a professional athlete in years. Another simply wrote, "This is why Ohtani is different." But words, however powerful, are ultimately only half the story with Shohei Ohtani. Because the other half, the half that has always defined him most visibly, happens on the field. And when Ohtani made his first appearance back after the WBC defeat, stepping onto the mound in front of a crowd that was watching him with the particular intensity reserved for moments of anticipated redemption, what followed was not simply a good performance. It was a statement. From the first pitch, those watching described something different in him. Not desperate. Not tense. Not carrying the visible weight of someone trying to prove something to the world. But utterly, completely locked in a way that seemed almost to have been sharpened rather than dulled by the pain of the tournament exit. The velocity was there. The movement was there. But what the most attentive observers noted was something that statistics cannot fully capture. A quality of presence on the mound that felt different from the Ohtani they had watched before the WBC. More settled. More certain. As if the defeat had burned away something unnecessary and left only the essential. Rushing, working with him from behind the plate, described the experience afterward as extraordinary even by the standards of what he had come to expect. He said the communication between them had a clarity and a precision that felt like it had been elevated by everything that had happened. That Ohtani was not pitching away from the WBC loss, he was pitching through it. Using it. Converting it into something that made every decision on the mound sharper and more deliberate. The numbers from that outing reflected exactly that. But the numbers were almost beside the point. One of the things that separates genuinely elite competitors from merely excellent ones is what they do with adversity in the hours and days that nobody sees. Anyone can perform well when momentum is with them. When the crowd is loud and the recent results are good and the confidence that comes from recent success is flowing naturally. Performing in those conditions requires talent and preparation, but it does not require anything exceptional from the emotional or psychological side of the person doing it. What requires something exceptional is what Ohtani did in the days between the WBC exit and his return to the mound. People who observed him during that period described a preparation process that was, if anything, more focused and more deliberate than usual. Not frantic. Not desperate. Not the preparation of someone trying to outrun a painful memory. The preparation of someone who had looked at what happened, understood exactly what it meant, decided precisely what to do with it, and then got to work. His physical routine did not change. His nutritional approach did not change. The systems he has built over years of meticulous self-management remained exactly in place, because those systems were never built for good times only. They were built for exactly this. For the moments when everything around you is difficult and the only reliable foundation is the structure you constructed for yourself long before the difficulty arrived. Teammates who passed him in the facility during those days described the same Ohtani they always encountered. Present. Focused. Warm when the moment called for warmth and concentrated when concentration was what the work required. If he was carrying the loss, and he was, because he is human and he cared, he was carrying it in the way he carries everything. Fully. Without pretending it was not there. But without letting it become larger than what it actually was. When Rushing's account reached the American sports media, the reaction was immediate and almost unanimous. In a media environment that has become increasingly skeptical of athlete authenticity, where public statements are routinely filtered through layers of management and where the gap between what athletes say publicly and what they actually think is understood to be enormous, Ohtani's locker room remark landed with unusual force. Because it had not come from Ohtani directly. It had not been packaged and released through official channels. It had come through someone else, someone who had been in the room, who had heard it firsthand, who was reporting it not as a managed narrative but simply as something that had happened and that he felt the world deserved to know. Several major American sports commentators noted that the remark revealed something about Ohtani's leadership style that had always been visible in its effects but rarely this clearly articulated. He does not lead through authority. He does not lead through dominance or through the kind of aggressive vocal presence that some elite athletes use to impose their standards on those around them. He leads through accountability. Through the willingness, in the hardest moment, when the easiest thing in the world would be to deflect or to stay silent, to stand up and say that the weight of this belongs to me. One commentator wrote that this quality, more than any statistical achievement, was what separated Ohtani from every other player of his generation. Another observed that the performance which followed, stunning, precise, seemingly powered by something deeper than physical talent alone, made the remark retroactively even more remarkable. Because he had not just said the right thing. He had then gone out and demonstrated that the words came from a genuine place. That the accountability was real. That the responsibility he had claimed in that locker room had been converted, through work and preparation and force of will, into something the world could actually see. There is one more layer to this story that deserves attention. Rushing did not have to say anything. What happens in a locker room after a defeat is, by an unspoken but widely understood convention, private. The internal conversations of a team in the immediate aftermath of a painful loss are not typically shared with the outside world. Players understand this. Coaches understand it. The entire ecosystem of professional sport operates on the assumption that certain moments belong only to the people who were present for them. Rushing made a deliberate choice to share what Ohtani said. And that choice tells you something important, not just about Ohtani but about the impact his words had on the people in that room. You do not break the unspoken convention of locker room privacy for something ordinary. You do not go to the American media and describe a teammate's private remark because it was merely impressive or professionally admirable. You do so because what you witnessed felt significant enough, human enough, true enough, important enough, that keeping it private felt like a disservice to the story of who this person actually is. Rushing, by sharing what he shared, was not betraying Ohtani. He was honoring him. He was saying, in the most direct way available to him, the person the world thinks it knows, the one it has constructed from highlight reels and contract figures and two-way statistics, is not even the most remarkable version of Shohei Ohtani. The most remarkable version is the one who spoke in that locker room after the loss. That version deserved to be known. In the days that followed the WBC defeat, the world had a question about Shohei Ohtani. Not about his talent. Nobody was questioning his talent. Not about his physical capabilities or his preparation or the extraordinary machinery of his athletic body. The question was simpler and deeper than any of those things. The question was, who is he when it hurts? The locker room remark answered it one way. Quietly. Privately. In words spoken not for an audience but for the teammates who deserved to hear them. The performance on his return answered it another way. Publicly. Visibly. In innings pitched with a precision and a presence that seemed to have been forged rather than diminished by the fire of the tournament exit. Together, the two answers form a complete portrait. Not of a player. Not of a brand. Not of a two-way phenomenon or a historical anomaly or a financial milestone in the story of professional sport. A portrait of a person who knows exactly who he is when things go wrong. Who takes responsibility without performance. Who prepares without excuses. Who competes without bitterness. Blake Rushing saw it happen in real time and decided the world needed to know. And now you do.